Well, for more on how gun issues are being addressed, I spoke with Robert Spitzer. Robert is chair of the Political Science Department at the State University of New York College at Cortland. He began by talking about the differences in gun control issues in the US and New Zealand.
There are four key differences between New Zealand and the United States with respect to the gun issue. First, the country of New Zealand has a parliamentary system with a single house legislature, meaning that when one political party takes control of the government, they control the whole thing, and that facilitates rapid policy change. Obviously, the United States is a three-branch system. It has two houses of Congress and lots of other factors that divide power in the way the governing system operates. So those two fundamental governing system differences are one important distinction between New Zealand and the U.S. Secondly, both nations have a National Rifle Association, but the NRA in New Zealand is not nearly as strident. The third thing is that while both nations are gun-owning nations, only about 5% of New Zealanders are gun owners compared to about 25% of Americans. And fourth, New Zealand does not have a Second Amendment right to bear arms, which of course the American Constitution does.
Now, this really is a multifaceted issue because it's not just politics, it's also the economics of it. In fact, we know that U.S. gun advocates basically tried to stay President Trump's ban on bump stocks. That was rejected on Tuesday by Chief Justice John Roberts. But what do we know about how gun makers have already been affected by this increasingly louder growing tide of concerns about gun reform?
Well, certainly gun manufacturers are feeling the pinch from the political pressures that are being placed on the NRA and on kind of the gun community with respect to the inability to enact stronger gun laws. It does look like the bump stock ban will go ahead, and it's kind of an anomaly given the Trump administration has been so friendly with the NRA, and of course the NRA embraced Donald Trump during the presidential election in 2016 and gave him a whole lot of money and other kinds of support. But the gun industry also has a more existential problem, which has two parts. One is that the gun-owning community is not growing. In fact, it's declining. Secondly, they produce a very durable commodity. A gun with a very minimal degree of upkeep can remain perfectly usable for many decades. And so you're not going through guns because they don't wear out the way other commodities and consumer products do. And so they're always looking for a way to sell new guns, to sell guns abroad, which was where the NRA comes in part, and to try and find new ways to push guns into American hands to try and keep up their profitability.
Now, we did see that some companies did take a stand on the issue, especially after the Parkland shootings. We saw Dick's Sporting Goods moving away from their sales of guns to focus on other strategies. How have some of these companies who have tried to veer away from guns, how have they been faring?
Well, with respect to Dick's Sporting Goods, which is a very large sporting goods company in the United States, they have suffered about a 3% fall off in profits over the last year. That is not unanticipated by any means, but they made a very calculated decision that they were going to phase out gun sales generally. And this, I would say, is in line with a growing list of American companies of many different varieties that have decided they don't want to do business with the NRA anymore. But they've clearly made a business and a political and a public relations calculation that in the long term, being on the side of avoiding guns is good for them, good for their bottom lines. And Dick's Sporting Goods sells many, many varieties of products aside from firearms.
Now, let's also look at some of the broader fallout that's come with some of these tragedies. We saw this week suicides by some of these gun violence survivors. And it really does remind us of how broad the effects of a mass shooting can be. So between the New Zealand ban, this decline in bump stocks and the suicides, what do you think this means for the gun community's push, not just domestically in the US, but abroad?
Well, these are all contributors to the general reminder to Americans that guns have lots of adverse consequences for order and safety in society. And it is an indication that the gun community is on the defensive and that Americans who generally support stronger gun laws, are giving the issue more attention. I think that's one effect of all of this.